technology and healthcare, they've come a long way, right? Which might make one think that we are better off in our health than our grandparents. But a new study is showing that's actually not true for both millennial and Gen Z women. In fact, several important health measures have worsened for these generations in the past few years. So to break down how and why, we're joined live by Diana Elliott, who is Vice President for U.S. Programs at the Population Reference Bureau, which published this study. Thank you so much for joining us to unpack your findings. What really struck us at first was that this isn't the first time that you found a decline in health for newer generations. I think it was in 2017. Your organization found millennials were losing ground, was the phrase, in the space, and now you're seeing the same pattern for Gen Z. So can you help us understand exactly what is worse off at this point?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Absolutely. I mean, we have absolutely found that these indicators have not improved over time. In fact, we've found that for young women, it's actually declined since 2017. And you'd be inclined to say, well, this is because of the pandemic. But in fact, these are trends that we have already been seeing. We find that despite gains in employment, in educational attainment, that women ages 25 to 34 in particular, we focused in on in our study, that they're having worse outcomes in terms of greater rates of suicide, higher maternal mortality, and more dying from murder more often. These are really hard statistics to hear. You know, we're in a country with a lot of wealth and resources, and yet these indicators are declining. I mean, for young women.
Just the indicators that you've listed are so grim. What is the why behind that? I mean, to hear the murder rate is up, you know, dying, what is going on?
Yeah, it's incredibly complicated. There's just no one reason. You know, we have a lot of factors at play here. There's social factors, structural factors, policy factors. You know, the U.S. is honestly exceptional in a really terrible way. None of the peer countries that we often think about have these same outcomes. And again, the pandemic certainly contributed to some of these outcomes, right? We had women who had less access, for example, to mental health or health resources during this period. We had increased intimate partner violence during the pandemic. So these factors certainly were at play, but these trends were already in play before the pandemic. So it's very complicated, and certainly it's this stew of social, structural, and policy factors that sets the U.S. apart in this way, and not in a promising or positive way.
Right now we're seeing on our screen a comparison of the pros and cons between young women versus, you know, earlier generations, and we see education, just focusing on that education, higher education, I should say, of millennial women, you know, completing a college degree. We've seen that increase, so that's a perk there. Just kind of reversing or seeing the other side of it. Apart from education, have there been maybe some, you know, silver lining situations here?
Yes, certainly the pay gap is closing. It's still there, but it's not as extreme as it was for millennial women's mothers or grandmothers, for example. So that's certainly a positive factor. We see more women in representation politically, which is absolutely a positive factor. So we are seeing these areas that are showing progress, and showing progress in the ways that we often hear about, right? That there are more women in political office, more women in the workforce, more women contributing and closing those gaps. But we like to say, too, that despite these gains and women working so hard to advance and trying to sort of improve their lives, we still have these really deleterious outcomes, right? Women experiencing these really tragic outcomes as well.
You know, when it comes to the tragic outcomes and also some of the silver linings, who's on the receiving end of that most of the time? Because we say women. Women, obviously, that's a really general kind of swath of the population. Who in particular is most affected by, you know, based on your findings?
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, women of color are most impacted on these really negative outcomes. So, for example, American Indian and Alaska Native women had a really big increase in their suicide rates. Black women have had an increase in maternal mortality outcomes. So, we're finding that there are the need for disaggregated data for knowing which groups are most affected is really important here. We also know, for example, that LGBTQIA plus identified people experience murder at higher rates than other people. So, for example, bisexual women are particularly susceptible to murder. This really calls for more data and better data that breaks out who's experiencing this so we can get to the why and create a path where we're fixing this.
To that point, and we've got a minute left here. I mean, obviously, this is a conversation that could be had for much longer than what we have at this moment, but how do you begin to fix this? I know data is a key component to figure out the key areas, but after that?
Yeah, no, great question. Awareness is huge. So just being on your program and talking about this is wonderful. We're getting the word out. We're making people aware that this is happening in our country and that these are things that we can set on a more positive course. We are also actively working and have made partnerships with groups who are in the advocacy space. We are not an advocacy organization. We're all about research, but we want advocates to take this information and run with it and start working towards creating smarter policies that protect young women in our country. These outcomes are absolutely fixable.
That's good to hear. We will certainly take that. Diana Elliott, Vice President for U.S. Programs at the Population Reference Bureau. Thank you for your time and insight. And folks, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back.
There's a better way to begin your mornings.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Morning Rush. Thanks so much for being with us.
Context and conversation.
This next story, we were talking about this earlier today.
Get the stories that will shape each day.
Here with us now is meteorologist Scott Withers. We got just wave after wave after wave.
So you can get on with yours.
So make sure you stay with us as we keep an eye on this developing story for you.
Morning Rush. Weekday mornings starting at 7, 6 Central. Only on Scripps News.
It's all about putting in the work. I prepare the same way for the long haul. Tonal gives you all those stats to be able to say, okay, let's do this now. It's all about just training your mind to be as great as we can. Tonal, be your strongest.
This is an important message for all American homeowners over 62 years old. Due to increasing retirement costs, the 2023 Home Equity Access Loan Program is now available for homeowners over 62 to pay off credit cards, bills, medical, and home costs. The Better Business Bureau gave HEAL an A+ rating, so you know you're working with the best in the business. Don't miss out. Getting tax-free cash has never been easier. Call now for your free HEAL info kit and find out how much tax-free cash you could get today. Call 1-800-908-0223. The Home Equity Access Loan is the safest, easiest way for older Americans to unlock their home's equity and turn it into tax-free cash you can use for anything. Call 1-800-908-0223. Find out how much tax-free cash you could get today. Don't wait. Call 1-800-908-0223. And unlike other loans, the Home Equity Access Loan will never take your home. No bank will take it away or evict anyone. It's your home and it'll stay that way. Live in the home you love for as long as you want and get the cash you need for your retirement. Call now for your free HEAL info kit and find out how much tax-free cash you could get today. Don't wait. Get your free guide today and get the cash you deserve. The guide has all the info you need, including how does a home equity access loan work? How do I qualify? How fast can I get money? And how much cash can I get? A home equity access loan was created so older Americans could get the cash they need to unlock their retirement. Use the money to pay bills, credit cards, update the house, then maybe do something special. It's your turn. Unlock your retirement. Call now for your free HEAL info kit and find out how much tax-free cash you could get today. Don't wait. Call 1-800-908-0223. That's 1-800-908-0223.
ESPN will have exclusive media rights to 40 NCAA championships. This is part of a $920 million 8-year deal between both entities. The deal covers 21 women's and 19 men's sports, including the women's side of March Madness. Sunday's Golden Globes Award show will celebrate Hollywood's diversity. Scripps News correspondent Clayton Sandell explains how years of criticism pushed the Globes to make some changes.